The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The New Orleans Saints bring back veteran wide receiver Brandin Cooks, but in the process, it feels like they gave him way too much money.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast.
New Orleans Saints reunite with wide receiver Brandin Cooks. This is something that we kind of expected could be the case. The Saints were clearly in pursuit of a veteran wide receiver to add to their otherwise very young wide receiver room for the most part. They've been playing sort of the ideals of familiarity all over again here in 2025, yet again. And so we're seeing a lot of reunions, guys coming back, all these other things. Brandin Cooks always felt like he was one of those veteran wide receivers that the Saints could potentially go after. Before we get into why the Saints shouldn't be done at the wide receiver position, I want to focus on what Brandin Cooks, the role that he serves here in New Orleans, what it is that he contributes to the team, and why the Saints might have overpaid for this role. Here's the reality of the situation, and nothing that I'm about to say has anything to do with what I think of Brandin Cooks. Brandin Cooks is still a talented wide receiver. He's going to be a veteran leader in this room, but the fact of the matter is that at best, he's your third wide receiver in this offense behind Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. That's just the truth of the situation. Unless the Saints expect to massively change Rashid Shaheed's role in 2025, or there's some mystery and uncertainty around Chris Olave, who started to work his way back last season, but never made his way back out onto the field. We never expected him to get out onto the field after those scary concussions, things like that. But barring anything unforeseen when it comes to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, at best, Brandin Cooks is your third best wide receiver. And that's okay. His role is perfect for New Orleans, who I was told the Saints were looking for a wide receiver that possessed, quote, an elite trait by a source. And that is something that Brandin Cooks does indeed bring in his speed. I get it. He's 30 plus years old. I get it. He didn't have a great year in 2020. For all of those things are true. And it's why I think the Saints overpaid in terms of what this contract is. However, he still packs the elite trait, which is what they wanted, which is speed. But it feels a little, and I'm going to use the word redundant, but I don't actually mean it in a negative way. But it does feel a little redundant. Brandin Cooks, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, each of them calling cards of speed bars. And so when you look at where Brandin Cooks fits in, I think one of the best things that Brandin Cooks is going to bring to New Orleans is the ability to be able to look at guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and say, hey, here's how you make this work. Hey, here's how you try this. Here's how to sell this route a little bit, differently because of your speed so that you can take advantage when you throttle down. Or here's how to convince somebody that you are throttling down so you can kick it into the next gear with your speed and create separation. I do think that Brandin Cooks will have a major impact on this New Orleans Saints wide receiver room, even if it doesn't come in the form of the stats that he's producing, but instead comes in the things that he gives to Chris Olave, to Rashid Shaheed, knowledge of the game wise that increase their stats and productivity in Kellen Moore's offense in 2025. That, to me, is the biggest thing that Brandin Cooks can and will contribute to the New Orleans Saints here in 2025 and potentially 2026. It's a 2-year, $13 million deal. Now, while we don't know what the actual structure of the deal is yet, i.e. signing bonus, guaranteed money, what's the base salary of the first year versus the second year, are there void years, all these other pieces, we don't know those details yet. But if things average out to being $6.5 million per year, I dare say that the Saints overpaid a little bit on getting Brandin Cooks here to New Orleans, especially when it comes to something that's a reunion, a guy that should be more than happy to return here to New Orleans, that has the opportunity to return to a team that has this bright, young offensive mind, all those other pieces. You feel like the Saints maybe have a little bit more of the sell here when it comes to Brandin Cooks, whose market, I don't know if it was super robust. We'll find out when we speak to him, because that question will certainly be asked. But again, the amount of money that a team gives a player, when you say that a team overpaid for a player, that's got everything to do with the team, nothing to do with the player. The player and their management team and their representatives and all those other things, they should be advocating for the most money possible for their players. So now that we're done talking about what Brandin Cooks' role might look like in New Orleans, and look, there's also the ability for him to be able to step in and contribute should there be more injuries at the position without you losing speed on the perimeter and without you having to turn to the youngest guys on your roster on the perimeter as well, should that happen. So there's value in what he provides in terms of depth, moving up, moving around, all of those other things as well. I want to be very clear about that. So I do think that Brandin Cooks will have a role and will have an impact for the New Orleans Saints here in 2025, because I'm not confident that the players are going to be able to stay completely healthy for 17 games. And I'm not confident that if they do, Brandin Cooks is anything more than a third wide receiver in the system. Outside of that, you're fine with all of the veteran things that he gives them, how he improves and impacts guys like Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, all of that. But the reason why I think that the Saints overpaid on this is $6.5 million per year. Now, we'll see what happens, like I said, when we get the actual contract details. What's the structure? What's the guaranteed money? All those other things. But a 2-year, $13 million deal feels like a lot for a player that's effectively going to be your third wide receiver at best, assuming that the top two guys stay healthy, and could potentially end up being the fourth option if you continue to invest in this wide receiver class, whether that be via free agency or via the NFL draft. And so for me, $6.5 million average per year feels like a little bit of an overspend, especially when projected contracts are expected to be $3 million per year. Not that anybody negotiates contracts off of what Pro Football Focus thinks contracts are going to look like, but that was certainly what the market felt like it was going to be, especially when you talk about a wide receiver in Brandin Cooks last year, who had 26 receptions in his age 31 season, 259 yards, an average of 10 yards per reception, and then 3 receiving touchdowns, appeared in 10 games, 9 of which was he a starter. And that's down from a year ago with Dallas, where he appeared in 16 games, came up with just 54 catches for 657 yards, but did contribute 8 receiving touchdowns as well. To his credit, almost all of those stats would have been number one for the New Orleans Saints at the position last year because of the number of injuries that the team withstood at the position. So I think it was a little bit of an overpay, but you had the money to do it. You wanted a veteran receiver. You want somebody to come in and provide some leadership. Brandin Cooks can absolutely do that. And cool story, you get him back, number 10 still available. He can literally go back to his old uniform if he wants to. There is some nice stuff to all this, but I do think that the team might have given up a little bit more than they necessarily needed to help man this position for what it is that they want, and especially in a situation like this where they do get the elite trait that they wanted in speed.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. You can check out some NBA lines like the battle in Brooklyn tonight. The Nets and the Mavericks face off. Okay, not the best game, but come on, it's sports. According to FanDuel, Dallas 1-point road favorite in this one. No Luka, no Kyrie. But yeah, yikes. FanDuel.com. Get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast.
Well, here we are, folks. The Giants agreed to terms, or about to sign, rather, Jameis Winston, all right, to a 2-year deal worth a reported $8 million with incentives built in that can reach as high as $16 million. So what we're going to do on this special podcast, this emergency podcast, we're going to talk about Winston. We're going to talk about what he brings. We'll talk about the contract. And then we will discuss whether the Giants are done with the quarterback position. Will they add another veteran? How is this going to affect the draft? So all of this is going to be about the quarterback. So again, welcome on in. Let's get into it because we have a lot of ground to cover. All right. Jameis Winston, 2 years, $8 million, up to $16 million with incentives. Now, I have not seen the terms of the deal, or the breakdown, I should say. I am willing, however, to, if I were a betting woman, which I'm not, but if I were, I am willing to bet that his contract is very similar to the one that Tyrod Taylor signed a couple of years ago. All right. Now, Tyrod Taylor's contract, for those of you who don't remember, it had a base salary, but Taylor could earn additional revenue if he was a starter. So if he took a certain number of snaps, if he played a certain, completed a certain percentage. I don't remember the specifics, but there were different incentives and escalators in his deal that paid him differently if he was a starter. All right. So when I look at Jameis Winston's contract, the basis, 2 years, $8 million, that comes to $4 million APY. You just don't find a starting quarterback at that rate. That's not starters money. That is backup money. And again, I think because the deal can double to, $8 million per year, if Winston were to hit all the incentives, you're looking probably at one that has a plan in there where maybe Winston won't be the starter on day one. So, we can call him a bridge quarterback because in a way he is. He's a guy who can come in, obviously, and I think he would be a wonderful mentor to a potential first-round pick if the Giants decide to go that route. And I say that because Jameis Winston, as y'all know, was a first-round pick many years ago. I think it was 2013. The Bucs drafted him. Jameis Winston has since kind of been relegated to a backup role. So he's a good source, I think, to sit and work with a potential rookie coming in and kind of guide that rookie so as to not make the same mistakes that maybe Winston made along his career. So, I actually like this move. I really do. I think Winston, would be a good mentor. I'm aware of the turnover issue, but I'm also aware that Jameis Winston is not afraid to sling the rock down the field. In fact, I think two of the receivers had their best years. I know Jerry Jeudy was one of them with the Cleveland Browns, and I think it was Cedric Tillman was the other. They had their best years with Winston throwing them the football in Cleveland. So I don't hate this move at all. I think this is a solid move. Is it a little surprising considering that the Giants were so gung-ho on, Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers? I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but what I think happened here, Friday, there was a report that Aaron Rodgers went to visit with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what was so interesting about that report is that Omar Khan, who's the GM for Pittsburgh, and Mike Tomlin, the head coach, according to our Pittsburgh contacts, they usually are out on the road going to all the pro days together, that they came back to meet with Rodgers, who had this introductory to the people in the Steelers building, to the coaches. That was a sign that maybe they are getting a little closer, I should say, to a deal. So with that said, I believe it was Tom Pelissero that came out with the report, but Rodgers apparently has had the parameters of a contract in place now with the Steelers for a few weeks. So they are getting close, it sounds like, to a deal. And quite honestly, folks, I didn't think Rodgers was coming here. I know that, there was some interest on both sides, but I always thought that if of the two, of Rodgers and Russell Wilson, I thought Wilson would be the more likely to come here. Now, speaking of Russell Wilson, what does this mean for him? Is he out of the picture? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before I do, just going back to Winston, now the Giants, like I said, they have a second quarterback in the room. Tommy DeVito was in the room as well. So they're going in the right direction. And I know there's some mixed feelings about Winston being, having been brought in. I really don't think this is a bad move. As far as the interceptions and the errant throws, you would hope that maybe Brian Dable within the system can coach that out of him. I realize that, it's asking a lot. And also, we don't know who the play caller is going to be for the Giants. Don't forget, is it Mike Kafka? Because remember, when Mike Kafka called the plays for Daniel Jones back in 2022, Daniel Jones had his lowest interception rate. So maybe they flip back to Kafka calling the plays this year if Winston ends up being the starter. And I say that's a big if because we don't know if that's indeed what it's going to be. It looks like it's going to be right now. Now let's talk about this whole idea if the Giants are done or what exactly is the next step for the Giants in the quarterback situation. As I mentioned in the previous section, Jameis Winston signed for what basically backup money. So one of two things could potentially happen here. And I think we can't rule out the most likely one here. And that is the Giants could potentially add still Russell Wilson. All right. Aaron Rodgers, like I said before, is not coming here. Russell Wilson could potentially come here. Now, hear me out on this. I know this is like double dipping, but hear me out on this, if you will. Russell Wilson and the Giants, I think a big reason why the two of them haven't, come together on a contract is money. I don't know what Russell Wilson is looking for per APY. I don't know what the Giants offered Russell Wilson APY, but usually when the two sides don't get together on a contract, because it does take two to make a contract, it's usually there is a gap in terms of what party A thinks he's worth and what party B thinks he's worth. So money is clearly the issue here. So now what I am wondering, and this might be a long shot, but look, we've got to consider this as a possibility. What I am wondering is the signing of Jameis Winston maybe a way to kind of nudge Russell Wilson to say, hey, look, we're offering you X, you want Y. Let's try and come together and meet in the middle someplace. It's possible because look, if Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh as is expected, the Giants have Winston. Could Winston start for them? Absolutely. Would they maybe want to have Wilson as their starter? I think they would. All right. So this could be a way to kind of nudge Wilson to say, hey, listen, if you want us, we're here, but you got to come down and meet us. You can't be asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. You've got to meet us closer to what our price is. So that is very much still a possibility. Now, if Wilson, who also drew interest from Cleveland, ends up going to Cleveland, then there's another ripple effect, which I'll talk about in the next segment, which has to do with the draft. All right. So there's kind of like a bunch of dominoes here, if you will, as to how this could all potentially play out. But that being said, the Giants in getting Winston, they protect themselves because look, there had been reports that Joe Schoen was willing to wait out Aaron Rodgers. That he was willing to give him his space. Take your time, Aaron. Make up your mind. We're not going anywhere. We've got this offer for you. Whenever you decide, we're here. We'll leave the light on for you. Well, again, because of what happened with the Steelers, that is no longer the case. Doesn't look like Rodgers is coming here. And quite honestly, I wasn't too sure Rodgers would be a good fit in the Giants' ecosystem, if you will. For Rodgers' purposes, the Steelers, a little older roster, a little bit more experienced roster, and a playoff roster. Giants aren't there yet. And if players, they always tell you, oh, I want to go someplace where I can win. Rodgers probably wasn't going to win playoff games here. So, given where the Giants are in their rebuild. So you've got Winston coming in, who, if you go back to the Super Bowl, remember there was a report that Winston said, hey, yeah, I would go play for the Giants if they asked me to. So here he is. Giants got him for a basically backup money. All right. Again, no. The Giants, depending on what they do next, if Russell Wilson suddenly says, oh my gosh, I better, rethink what I'm asking, it is possible. It is possible that Russell Wilson signs with the Giants to be their starter. Winston now becomes the backup. And then as for Tommy DeVito, well, that all depends on what happens in the draft. Right? So you see how the different roads can possibly develop. I personally think that the Giants are probably going to go with Winston, and they might be looking at the draft for their next quarterback. But I'm going to get into that in just a little bit more. So it's an interesting scenario. We probably will not hear from the Giants or Winston more specifically until, my guess would be Monday is probably when we will hear from Winston regarding, the details, where this came to, what he was told as far as what his role is going to be. But Winston, I've got to confess, I like the deal. I like the money. I like what he brings to the table. I know, I don't like the turnovers, but look, at least this is a guy who's going to try and air it out and give these receivers an opportunity to do their thing.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. You can check out some NBA lines like the battle in Brooklyn tonight. The Nets and the Mavericks face off. Okay, not the best game, but come on, it's sports. According to FanDuel, Dallas 1-point road favorite in this one. No Luka, no Kyrie. But yeah, yikes. FanDuel.com. Get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
A lot happened last Friday with Aaron Rodgers visiting the Steelers.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
We got to talk about what went down last Friday, because I recorded that episode late Thursday going into Friday. Actually, it's a little bit technically on Friday morning, and put that out Friday morning. But then shortly after that, like in the late morning hours of Friday, Jerry Dulac, my colleague at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, broke the news to the world that Aaron Rodgers was actually at the Steelers facility last Friday, and it seemed to many at first that this could have been the final straw, with him signing the deal with the Steelers, ending the saga, and ending the question of where he's going to be in free agency. But then shortly after that gets out, we saw a lot of reports come in that that wouldn't be the case, and that he, in fact, this was more of a precursory visit with the team. Rodgers came, met with the Steelers brass for about 6 hours, then left with no deal. So you're probably sitting here wondering, well, wait, did that mean anything? What was the point of all this? Well, there could be many takeaways, but I'll give you mine. I think the biggest thing that I see here is that the Steelers, despite how people say, oh, they're desperate, they really want Aaron Rodgers. If they were desperate to sign Aaron Rodgers and he's flirting supposedly with the Giants and the Vikings might still be in play, he would have left Pittsburgh with a deal. They would not have let him walk out the door unless they were like, unless they were sitting there saying like, hey, Aaron, we absolutely need you. But I don't think that's what happened there. Because Rodgers would have been signed to a contract, they would have ended this whole thing, and we would now know that Aaron Rodgers is the Steelers quarterback, and he still might be. I'm not saying that he's not going to be. They definitely want him, which is why they're entertaining all this, and they have a price that they've set out for him. But if they were willing to pay him what I think he thinks that he wants for himself, he would have signed this contract by now. And unless he just really loves attention, and that's what this is all about, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though there's a lot of history to show that he kind of is about that. But I'm going to give Aaron Rodgers the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's just the Steelers haven't given him the number that he really wants in a contract. So now Rodgers is still being considered officially by the Giants, though there were reports saying that maybe that's lessening and more as time goes on. They signed Jameis Winston. There's also reports that he's actually not out of the running with the Minnesota Vikings just yet either. There were some reports saying that, and national insiders saying that, like, hey, the Vikings have indicated they're not going gun-ho for Aaron Rodgers, but they're not giving up on JJ McCarthy. But then there were some people that said, oh, they're not exactly out on Aaron Rodgers either. So who knows where things actually go there. There's a lot of national insiders who still think Rodgers is going to end up with the Steelers in the long run. And to me, that makes sense for Aaron Rodgers. Like, if I'm Aaron Rodgers and the Vikings don't want me, I'm 41. I'm trying to live out my best last year, maybe two at best, if it's going to be anything, whatever it is. Why would you be on a team that's not going to give you a competitive chance? You know, when he joined the Jets were an up-and-coming team that looked like they were a quarterback away from being a real contender in the NFL. Now he's going, if he joins the Giants, it's going to be an even worse situation than that because they have so much rebuilding to do. Now, the Vikings would make sense. He'd have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. He'd have a good offensive line. He'd have playmakers. He'd have a defense. Like that would make a lot of sense. The Vikings looked like they were a QB away last year as well. But if he chose the Steelers, they're not what the Vikings were last year, but they are a playoff team. And again, they've been they can consistently get to the playoffs. So if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're looking for a fit, the Steelers actually would make a lot of sense there. So that's why I think there's a lot of links to that. The Steelers obviously want Aaron Rodgers, but want him at a certain price. And Aaron Rodgers, I think, is entertaining this because he thinks that the Steelers might be one of his best options, might be the best option right now. But I think Aaron Rodgers is also trying to get somebody to come up and actually pay him what he thinks he's worth. Now, I don't know if that's the $45 million a year deal that Mike Florio put out there that supposedly, you know, Aaron Rodgers' agent told him or whatever. But to me, when I hear that number, I think that's not anything near where the Steelers are offering. And I think the Steelers have a number. They're like, hey, Aaron, this is the facility. This is what you'll be able to work with. You're going to have these receivers. You're going to have this tight end. We're developing a line. This is what's it's going to be. But this is the number, and it's not moving. And if you don't take it, you know, that is what it is. Personally, I think that the Steelers shouldn't be bothering with Rodgers. That's just my personal opinion. I've been saying it for a while. You look at how Rodgers handled things with the Jets. He didn't show up for OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and there were questions. There was all sorts of drama. He was supposed to be a leader. He didn't look like a leader early on. It caused drama within the team. And even if he does promise Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney that he's going to do that when he sits down with them and signs this contract, unless it's written into the contract that he has to do these things, how can they trust that he's going to do that, considering what he's done in the past? And another thing that, you know, we understand that Arthur Smith had a problem with Russell Wilson about was he had a problem with Russell Wilson adjusting plays and calling audibles and calling hot routes that weren't designed and things, and doing things that he didn't like. How is he going to react when Aaron Rodgers just does whatever he wants? Because that's what he's always done. You look at Aaron Rodgers and his history. He got the Jets to sign all sorts of receivers that he wanted. You think he's not going to try to just change your plays? He probably won't get the same run of the Steelers organization. Like they're probably not going to be signing Alan Lazard or whoever's, you know, to big contracts that hold them back a whole lot. But I could see him, like, who's to stop him on the play? Like, hey, you know what, Calvin Austin, run the streak here. I think I see something here, and Arthur Smith is going to lose it. So for the very thing that they're saying they don't want Russell Wilson for, I think Aaron Rodgers does that tenfold. So so there's that. Rodgers is known for wanting those things. It's hard to see that working for the Steelers with what they're trying to do right now. And I truly believe that, again, I think that at the end of the day, the Steelers are still just biding their time because their next big move is going to be the 2026 NFL draft when they trade up and go get a quarterback in what is, I think, what I anticipate to be a much better quarterback class than there is this year. But the bottom line for the Steelers and the potential of them getting Aaron Rodgers, at least in my book and what I'm looking at, is that this is a situation where the Steelers are not going to be destroyed and bummed out if he doesn't pick them, which is why they're not jumping. They have their offer in. It's this offer. You know, I'm going to estimate 20 to 25 million. I don't know. When I said 15 million about Justin Fields, people thought I was crazy. Turned out that was the number that they offered him. So, but you know, I was saying, like, they're probably keeping the number down. Just to bring in Aaron Rodgers. They probably want, hey, 1 year of this could work. Let's just see what happens. It's a veteran who comes in. Maybe some things can click. Maybe there could be something there on the offense. That I can see where their vision is there. The question will be, does Aaron Rodgers want to go with that? And if he doesn't, where do they go from there? But I think the bottom line is, again, the Steelers, this whole quarterback situation this year is a rental. Like, whatever happens this year, this is not like Aaron Rodgers is not coming to the Steelers to reshape the offense in his image and make it so that he's the leader moving forward that passes down, you know, whatever he teaches to the next franchise guy. I'm not even sure if Aaron Rodgers is going to sign a 2-year deal with the Steelers. They might be looking at, hey, 1-year deal situation, and we'll deal with that because they have Mason Rudolph signed for 2 years. And I think what the Steelers might actually be planning to do right now is they might be planning to get their quarterback next year, but they also, I think, might be planning to get a quarterback this year in the draft, even though I'm telling you, I don't think this is the quarterback draft year. I don't think this is the year to go try to get your starter, your franchise guy. But I do think this is a year that you could go get a future backup, a guy that can be a depth quarterback for you for the long run, kind of the way Mason Rudolph has been for the past several years. And that could still have value as you move forward. And that's something I think the Steelers will end up doing. And I want to talk about who their options are. And I actually did my first quarterback rankings of this class in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette as part of a Sunday feature. And I'm going to go over those rankings with you and why I think the primary plan for the Steelers at quarterback in this draft class is to find the backup that maybe they can develop into a starter, or maybe is just the next Mason Rudolph for the next years, helping with bridges and helping in pinches moving forward, a guy that they can have for cheap for the next 4 years on a rookie contract.